The War of the Heartland. Welcome back to Invest Global. This is one of the most important videos I've recorded in a long time, and it will really help you understand the current global economic environment, understanding what's going to happen moving over to the next 10 years, global alliances, the SCO Meeting, China's new Belt and Road Initiative, and how all of this ties together. I'll have timestamps throughout this video to help you understand, and we'll get into these main 5 points here in a second, but first, I want to start it off with this very important quote: "He who rules East Europe controls the heartland. Who rules the heartland commands the world island. Who rules the world island commands the world." John Mackinder. So, in this video, we're really going to go over all those things. Number one being the geographical pivot points of history, and then we'll go through some of these more kind of modern things that are happening in the world right now, and then wrapping it up with 7 really powder keg situations and opportunities. So once you understand this macro environment, then you can take advantage of it by understanding trends, being able to trade in the market, being able to position yourself properly. So let's hop right into it. Basically, I'll have timestamps throughout this whole video so you can skip back or ahead, depending on what you want to do. But first, we'll start off with the geographical pivot of history, going through John Mackinder's speech that really gave birth to modern geopolitical theory. Then we'll go through Chimerica and Eurussia's divorce, China's Belt and Road Initiative, their new One Belt, One Road Initiative, the SCO Meeting, so the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which first started out as the Shanghai 5. This year in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, we'll go through 2 trilateral agreements, and then 1 newest member being Iran, and then 7 of the largest macro powder kegs and opportunities that we see in the world today. So, like I said, this video is very, very important. This is one that you'll probably want to rewatch again. And it really is staple moving into the next 10 years, in my personal opinion. Each one of these points could be a separate video in and of itself. So we'll try and go through them properly, help you understand the macro picture, and then end out with some opportunities and some positives, right? So to kick it off, we'll start with this quote: "If China succeeds in linking its rising industries to the vast natural resources of the Eurasian highland, then quite possibly the empire of the world will be in sight." Interesting. Okay, so the geographical pivot of history. In 1904, John Mackinder gives the geographical pivot of history speech, and he wrote a book on this, giving birth to the modern science of geopolitics. Napoleon once said, "To know a nation's geography is to know its foreign policy." And John Mackinder really goes after this as well. We'll kind of talk about this more in detail, but basically he argued that geography shapes the destiny of people, nations, and empires. The natural seat of power, he claimed, lay in a vast world island. So you can kind of see that here, and we'll go into it in more detail in this next slide. So basically, the world island is this landmass that controls roughly 60% of the world's landmass and 50% of the world's natural resources. Any power able to control the centralized landmass would have a stranglehold over the world's natural resources. Right now, Russia, largest commodity producer, China, basically the world's factory, right? So the idea is, the big picture idea that I kind of talked about in the previous video, Europe's energy crisis, is combining these 2 powers together. And when you combine these massive wealth of commodities with this industrial power that has kind of been supplying all of the consumption of the West over the past decades, really, it's going to be interesting to watch how this plays out. And really at the center of this is the heartland, which includes a lot of Eastern Europe and former Soviet territories. So the SCO is centered around this. The organization we'll go through here in a minute. Basically, to see this on the world map, you flip it to left 90 degrees. Then it really starts with China at the top, goes through Siberia in the steppe, and then Russia's at the bottom. Mackinder describes the edges of the world island as the rimland. So this would basically be like the rimland would be around here, and that's kind of where the naval power is very important. So then we're moving into Chimerica and Eurussia's divorce. This is very, very interesting, actually. Basically, I talked about this in the previous video, how the East has really supplied the West demand, and really the West has kind of had this hyper-financialization. They've had this with the dollar being global reserve currency. But, Mackinder's theory I still think holds true. However, writing that in 1904, you can't factor in a lot of things, right? 1904 to 2004 is a massive difference. But think about 2004 to 2022, all the things have changed. But I do think at the end of the day, he was right about this kind of War of the Heartland being very, very vital to the world. Not a lot of people understand this, so it's very key. If you are one of these people that can understand it, you'll be able to understand the bigger picture here, right? What's going on. And technology and globalization have really trumped geography over most of the 20th century. Really after the fall of the Soviet Union, China kind of going from an emerging market really to this developed market they have today. The Anglosphere, so basically the Anglosphere is the US, Canada, it's like English-speaking countries. So Australia, you can toss the UK, Ireland there. They were really able to get rich off these natural resources. And then also using sanctions, kind of weaponizing the dollar, having the global reserve currency, being able to print money, do all these things. Kind of a simplified way of putting it in that way, but it gives them a lot of power, right? And a lot of kind of advantage on the global chessboard, if you will. And basically, they use this to create the economy of imaginary wealth, as Putin puts it, which I love that quote, by the way. So the economy of imaginary wealth is being replaced by the economy of real and hard assets. So basically creating the hyper-financialized system, raising the standards of living domestically while negating the land power of the world island. So Chimerica and Eurasia played a key role in global trade in the low inflation world, propped up by three main pillars. Now, these are actually pretty important to understand. I highly recommend, well, it's a long document, but I might do a separate video on it, is War and Industrial Policy by Zoltan Pozsar, who's, I think he's like one of these guys at Credit Suisse. It's fascinating. That document is really, really good, but he talks about kind of these three main pegs. One being the cheap immigrant labor, keeping nominal wage growth stagnant in the US. 2, cheap Chinese goods, raising real wages amidst the stagnant nominal wages. 3, cheap Russian natural gas, fueling German industry and Europe as a whole with massive leverage, right? So this is really interesting. When you look at a system, it's inputs and outputs, right? Same with your brain, right? You can choose to be watching this or you can choose to be watching Netflix. It depends on what input you're deciding to have in your brain. Inputs dictate your outputs. Take away the inputs, the outputs suffer. So look at this leverage. $2 trillion of German output, right? So their industrial output, things that they're creating, relied on $27 billion of Russian input. So take out the $27 billion of input, and you have $2,000 billion, right? 2 trillion is 2,000 billion of German output relied on that tiny fraction. That's to me is insane, right? Massive leverage. That's kind of one of Putin's attack vectors, in my personal opinion. And then let the cards kind of, or the dominoes, however you want to call it, fall where they may. This system was temporarily a perfect match, so the European Union paid euros for cheap Russian gas, US paid dollars for cheap Chinese imports, and Russia and China dutifully recycled their earnings to G7 claims, right? So they kind of like went along with these rules with the petrodollar system, the eurodollar system, US dollar being the global reserve currency. Now things are changing. So theory of trade expectations, there's a whole like massive paper book written on this, I think in like the 1800s, but really to boil it down, very, very simple way. If there is trust, trade works. If trust breaks, trade doesn't work. Very, very simple, right? Trust was broken beginning of this year in February. It was like February 24th when Russia invaded Ukraine. I talked about this before it happened when Kazakhstan was in crisis. I did a video talking about literally like all the things I've talked about in this video before the Ukraine thing happened. And anyways, I'll move on from there. So next we'll move into China's Belt and Road Initiative. This is actually really, really interesting, right? So if you think about the old Silk Road and the new version of China's One Belt, One Road Initiative, essentially they're aiming to reunite this world island, right? So that's really this area in the One Belt, One Road. You can see in that picture there, right here, all these trade routes, right? And we'll kind of get into this a bit more because the SCO meeting is really China kind of going about building all these things, right? Is building these economic ties with places like Mongolia, Belarus, a lot of the stands like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. But essentially, like I said, so they're trying to create this common market for 3 billion people, capture the world's energy and food reserves in one great unification of power. Interesting. It is yet to be seen if Mackinder was right, and eventually the Anglosphere sea power finally succumbs to the land power of the world island. So that's really, that's why the UK was so dominant. That's why you look at the United States, it's massive sea powers. Whereas, you look at the world island, it's really this kind of land power that is so important. And that's what Russia and China actually have. Because they have the population, they have the commodities, they have the industrial power. Next, we'll move into the SCO meeting in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. So a little bit of the history on the SCO. I think it was like the 90s, the Shanghai Five was formed. So that was China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, if I remember correctly. And then Uzbekistan joined in like 2001. That created the, so that moved past 5 members, right? That created a 6th member. So that's basically like all the stands and pretty much all those 3 stands, the Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, all share a border with China. So very, very important trade partners in Central Asia. I also think it's quite interesting because these countries are massive, massive powerhouses. But most people in the West, you ask them about these places, they have no idea. They wouldn't even know Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan, where to put it on the map, yet alone the population, the commodities, the economy. Personally, these are things that I'm fascinated in. That's why, I do this channel. I love this stuff. I'm actually really, really interested in investing in Uzbekistan specifically, and potentially Kazakhstan over the next 10 years. So, and I'll definitely be spending some time there next year. So anyways, talk about that. So the industrial factory of the world's largest regional organization covering 60% of Eurasia, 40% of the world population, and more than 30% of global gross domestic product. So that's very powerful. If you add in kind of these observer states, it's about 50% of the population, a lot higher of global GDP. So really interesting there, the kind of power they've amassed. When you look at the SCO, for example, versus NATO, a lot of people say, the SCO is like the evil version of NATO. Not really. They're not really comparable, to be quite honest. I mean, this isn't a military pact. This is more, it actually was formed as like an anti-terrorist thing. So that's a lot of what they discussed in this meeting, was terrorism in that region. Obviously, with the Middle East, it's very, very complicated. Also, the U.S. kind of trying to push some of their ideologies into this area of the world, and kind of keeping that safe, building economic ties. And I'll go over these three main points here in a second. But first, I did want to go over this. So I think it was 2017 that India and Pakistan joined as full members. Then there's like observer states, there's dialogue partners. Some of these include like Mongolia, Afghanistan's in there, Turkey's in there. But it's interesting because Turkey is kind of this middleman, right? They're part of drawing a blank here. They're part of NATO, but they're also kind of like, they have ties with this SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Next, we'll move on to these three main points. So really, there's two trilateral agreements that are really interesting. So it's Russia, India, China, and then Russia, Mongolia, China, right? So Russia, India, China, the reason that's very, very powerful is Russia's basically trying to replace all this money that they lost, basically supplying the West with commodities, right? So supplying it with natural gas. Replacing this with China and India. I mean, China and India combined have higher population than the West. Leaders discussed basically two primary documents in this trilateral agreement. The concept for cooperation, so this is a mutual connectivity and efficient transport corridor, and then roadmap for de-dollarization. That's the most interesting one to me, is the roadmap for de-dollarization, gradually increasing the share of national currencies in mutual settlements and cutting down on the use of USD. Then Iran actually joined as a permanent member of the SCO. Beyond that, we have the Russian, Mongolia, and China trilateral agreement, which is very, very important, especially for the Siberia 2 pipeline, which essentially takes all this gas flow going from Siberia that used to go to Europe, pushing it east into China. They're going to start construction on it in 2024, and then it should be done by around 2030. But very, very powerful, because it's kind of the first time ever this would happen. And Mongolia plays a key role in that. Mongolia is another place I'm very interested in investing in, by the way. A lot of these places, like, ignore kind of China and Russia as far as like, at least personally, like, I'm not that interested in investing in those. But these kind of other places where most people don't really know a lot about them, Mongolia, that stands, very, very fascinating to me. Let's see. Finally, okay, so once you understand all these things, kind of putting them together, then you'll be able to go, okay, I understand the bigger picture. You can always rewind in this video. Like I said, each of these topics could literally be a video in and of itself. So I'll probably be ending up doing more videos on this stuff moving forward. So anyways, these are the kind of, at least in my personal opinion, the 7 largest macro powder kegs and opportunities right now in the global markets. So number 1, that's global energy crisis, because that powers everything, right? You can't have wars, you can't have trade, you can't have anything without energy. Energy is vital. Then Chinese economic crisis, Japanese currency crisis, Eurozone economic crisis, emerging market currency collapse spiral, Russia-Ukraine conflict escalation, oil prices spike, commodity supercycle. So basically, I mean, with all of those, I'm not going to give investment advice, I'm not an investment advisor. However, you can basically take the thesis, take the narrative, and go, okay, if this happens, then I do this, right? So if-then statements, that's the way that I like to look at it when you have an investment narrative. So like, if the Japanese currency crisis kicks off, right? So if they start dumping treasuries, for example, then I do this, right? So then I short JPY, or then I short blah, 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 or then I long the DXY, right? There's many ways of playing these narratives. All of these comes down to the markets, right? But understanding how to short and how to long, but then also manage risk is very, very important. If you want to understand technical analysis, I have a full in-depth course. It's 100% for free on this channel called Global Technical Analysis. I'll probably be doing a revamped version of that and doing some other free courses with investing. But yeah, that's basically all for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, let me know in the comments. Also, like the video if you like it. Subscribe to the channel, stay up to date. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, anything like that. All good. Okay, so that's all for this one. Invest Global. Until next time.